I would love to get started with just a thought around, have you identified any effective models, whether from other states, other countries, other sectors, that California could look to when thinking about creating a more sustainable and equitable arts economy?
I am happy to jump in there. And I think there's quite a bit of work right now that might be interesting that has to do with arts prescriptions. So this idea of social prescribing and providing non-clinical, non-pharmaceutical options for people. And in my earlier presentation, talking about the fact that the evidence is in, we know that art can be very effective in dealing with anxiety, dealing with stress and trauma, all kinds of things. That there's this way of thinking about disrupting a prescribing system, or in this case, medical system in some ways, in order to create opportunities not only for people who might benefit from it, but also that would result in jobs. So I feel like lots of examples like that. At Stanford, we're also working right now on a cultural policy fellows program that was originally designed to use something called the Intergovernmental Personnel Act to deploy artists in federal government work. Again, because we have evidence of how artists can help shift culture and reach people where they are, all of these kinds of things. We're now working more broadly on policy efforts in California with the California Arts Council, but also across the country. And the way I see this kind of stuff is that these are models not only to kind of grow the supply of artists who work in a certain kind of way, but also to build demand for those artists, to make it clear to people who are working around climate change, around healthcare, around education, that artists can be very effective in working in those contexts. So those are some of the things that I think of.
I'll just add that other countries do it differently. Britain dedicates their national lottery to the support of the arts and things like the National Theater, which many of us love to visit, and the movies and TV shows that we love are supported by their national lottery.
Thank you so much for those thoughts on this. It is also my pleasure to invite Laura Stock into the conversation. Laura is going to help moderate this panel. Laura Stock, MPH, is Director Emeritus of the Labor Occupational Health Program. She retired as Director of the LOHP in February 2025 and continues to serve as Director of Community Engagement with the California Labor Lab. During her time with LOHP, Laura administers their programs providing training, research support, materials development, and technical assistance for workers, employers, health professionals, and the general public. She also provided direction to staff on translating research findings to practice and to public policy. Thank you so much for joining us to moderate today, Laura.
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here and happy to be able to hear the great presentations and help facilitate this. Just one comment, I really appreciate, Deborah, in your comments, really highlighting the critical role that art is playing to actually, in society. And we see in this particular moment, as we look at what's happening in the arts in the moment in terms of like the Kennedy Center and the taking away funding from particular kinds of art, it really speaks to the power that art can have and the threats that people are facing as a result of that. And then we also see, in spite of the incredible value and importance of the arts, we also see from Ed the challenge to making a living as an artist, how almost impossible it is to have steady and sustainable work. So I appreciate those comments, and we do have a number of questions in the chat to address that. And the first I'd like to ask is if you could talk a little bit more about the role of unions in regulating and providing benefits to art industry workers, and in the context of the fact that this employment is so non-traditional, like health and retirement, et cetera. So can you comment on that?
Yeah, I'll take a stab. It's the short answer is it's critical because they are the ones who provide the health insurance and the pensions that the employers don't because they hire people as independent contractors. So it's absolutely not possible to sustain a living without having the support of your colleagues in the union behind you. And those who aren't eligible for the union coverage are disproportionately in the ranks of those who fail to get out of poverty and are the ones who use the food banks and SNAP benefits. So it's not surprising that in a progressive state, um, the unions have always represented well the interests of those in the Hollywood and entertainment industries, but it's no less essential today than it's always been.
And Deborah, do you have anything?
Pardon me, you essentially have a zero poverty rate among union members.
Yeah, and I agree very much with Ed and don't have a lot to add, but I do think that unions, when you think about people who are working behind the scenes, like stagehands and preparators in the world of exhibition making, you really, those people really are moving all around, and there aren't very many stable jobs. So being able to have a union that helps to support you and negotiate things for you, I think is really important.
Yeah, and I understand that later in the day, we're going to be having a panel of people who represent some of those unions. And I think the question also speaks to the challenge of union organizing in such an industry that has such non-traditional employment relations, where many are working as independent contractors or going from gig to gig, as you described. So it'll be interesting to hear more about strategies that are used to actually promote unionization in this industry. So thank you for that.
Can I just
Yeah,
make one
go
more
ahead.
comment?
Definitely.
In some ways, California's two of the most prominent sectors in California are agriculture and entertainment, and both have been disproportionately non-traditional in their employment practices. Hollywood has always been based on the project, a film or a TV show, and agriculture, of course, is daily on-call workers often. So in some sense, those industries were ahead. What's changed is that more and more industries use those practices.
Yeah. Thanks, Ed. So then another question is, based on this data, do you think that a guaranteed basic income is especially warranted for artists as opposed to other gig workers or people working below the poverty line?
I'd be curious to hear how Ed responds. I mean, I think guaranteed basic income, a kind of safety net, is good for everyone. And I think the point of piloting for artists is to understand the unique impacts, but to be part of a broader movement in relationship to that kind of effort.
I harken back to Deborah's talk, which it turns out that societies that offer a higher income floor also tend to be more supportive of the arts. So it's not like I think there are societies that get that if you starve the arts, you starve all of us emotionally and psychologically as well as financially. And um, societies in Scandinavia, Canada, Britain are just much more supportive of the arts and
Yeah,
of people generally.
yeah. And I go back to that. I'm not a social scientist, but I go back to that idea of trying to understand what is lost if you don't provide a kind of base level of security for people. What creativity doesn't exist in our society? What ideas aren't fully pursued? What projects don't happen in communities? What is the loss? And so I think we learn a lot about that from those guaranteed basic income pilots, because what you saw with $1,000 a month in San Francisco, we all know that's not a lot of money. But that isn't really what it's about. It's about a kind of security. It's about the difference between not knowing where the next paycheck is coming or if you're going to have another job, and just knowing that something will be coming and what that does to free up your creativity, your ability to just breathe. And I think a lot of creative people in our communities, a lot of people in general, are so having to focus so much on the immediate, the how am I going to get my kids to school? What am I going to put on the table for dinner? That it makes the ability to imagine a future for yourself and your community a privilege, because you don't actually have the space to dream. So for me, I think it's a real loss. And in a place like California, where there's so much creativity and it's so diverse, um, it's a lot to think about in terms of what we could be and what that could be contributing to who we are.
And I think one of the sad things is that it's a very expensive state. So even the numbers that we presented use sort of traditional national measures of poverty and low earnings, and $40,000 for a family in California does not take you very far at all, even in the most rural parts of California.
Yeah, thank you. And sort of building on that, I was wondering, and again, in sort of building on what you said, the potential power of the arts can be. I'm wondering if you have thoughts, sort of giving, we are obviously in a challenging moment now. There's, definitely attack on the arts, on the independence of the arts, on the message that artists can convey, as well as all the other attacks we're seeing, immigrant workers, loss of, jobs, attacks on a plunging economy, et cetera. So do you have thoughts sort of in this moment of how you see the arts, how can the arts be used to sort of engage the public, mobilize the public to take action and see themselves as having a role in shaping what, the society that people are living on? If you have any thoughts on that or examples of when you've seen that done successfully.
Mhm. Oh, I have many, Ed, maybe I will jump in. I mean, as I said, I think that engaging in art that is meaningful to you, to your life experience, your culture, who you are, what you value, is so important. And sharing those experiences, helping us, people around you understand the meaning of those experiences, is also really important. So I think a lot about, when looking at what appears to be the focus of some of the things that are happening in this country related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and things that are happening on college campuses, things like this. I think about long-standing traditions of community centers and houses and programs that are celebrating particular life experiences, particular communities, and the idea that these places are open and always have been to everyone, and they focus on sharing those cultural experiences in order for us to understand one another and to kind of see our interdependence. So, this is a top of mind for me, particularly in the context of a university where I think, we talk a lot about academic freedom, which is afforded to a particular profession in a professional context. That is really, really important, that you need to have freedom of expression to be able to really engage deeply in debate and to talk with people who have ideas that are different from yours, and not only to listen to them, but to try to understand them. And I think that curatorial judgment and artistic expression is quite similar, afforded in the context of the arts, profession, that we need to have places where we can fully express and exchange. And I think the arts do that really, really well. We have artists coming all the time to our stages and exhibiting in our galleries and on campus that I think are doing this kind of work really beautifully. Thinking about the way art and engaging in art can be a learning experience and can connect you to people that you might not know a whole lot about. I also think that it's really important that we, and this is me, but that we really try to engage deeply with difference, when, you know, that we really try to understand where people are coming from and why they may feel the way that they do, even if it isn't, you know, the way we feel. And I think you see this in theater performances. I often think I'm at a concert at Frost Amphitheater, and one of the things that brings me great joy is, this is going to sound strange, but is a moment where maybe this is not the music for me, but what I am getting joy from is the people around me who love this music. And I feel like we need more experiences like that, where we start to value the idea that it doesn't all have to be for me, that the whole idea is we're different, and that is what makes it great.
Thank you. Ed, do you have any comment you want to make on that?
Well, this past Sunday, I went to see the Isaac Julian show at the De Young Museum here in San Francisco. And I know that my sister, who may be watching now, has written extensively about the work of Isaac Julian. And if that man's art doesn't make you think about the events of the last 4 or 5 months in stark terms, I can't imagine any news report, any documentary footage that could get the points across that Isaac Julian gets across in more emphatic terms than his art, his films that are at the Young Museum. So I highly recommend it to those of you who are in the Bay Area now.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, again, just, as you're emphasizing the critical role that art plays, it makes it more disturbing to see that access to art is being limited, funding for art is being limited, on top of an environment that you described, Ed, where even prior to some of the immediate changes, it's been, so difficult to sustain work in this area. And so I'm wondering, are there, as you think ahead and sort of, I think we've talked about guaranteed basic income as one potential strategy. I'm wondering if you have other thoughts, sort of on the policy end, like how do we bring together, how do we raise awareness of the value and the essential contribution of art, and how do we get the funding to support it, and the funding to support open and accessible art from diverse voices? Do you have any thoughts on sort of what's needed? What are the next steps that we all should be taking to try to ensure that this potential is reached?
Well, the National Endowment of the Humanities and the National Endowment of the Arts have never been adequately funded. And the support for NPR and PBS, which the conservatives are attacking, has never been very much to begin with. The support by philanthropy helps, but the societies across the globe where the arts are flourishing to a greater degree than here have public support in one way or another to a much greater degree than we do. And to use Jolie Fisher's terms, we need more bread to have more roses. There just needs to be more public investment in the arts so that fewer people are forced to be pauperized by their choice to be expressive artists in whatever medium.
Yeah, and this is where I'm a very big both and person. As I said, I think that we need to support artists who can provide transformative and meaningful experiences to the people in our communities. We need painters and poets, we need musicians and performers, and we need those people to be treated as professionals. And we need to support artists whose work is really focused on integrating into other sectors and supporting some of the challenges that we face in our communities. And so if you look at those things together, a thriving arts ecosystem would have lots of opportunities for professional artists and we would be growing the demand for artists to work in the context of art and health and art, what I talked about earlier. And I think that part of what we're doing with the Cultural Policy Fellows program that I think is really interesting is just helping people like Danielle Brazil, who's the director of the California Arts Council, and other people who are leading these kinds of state and local agencies across the country to imagine what the future of these agencies can be. As Ed says, they're always underfunded. They're small grant makers and conveners. Those grants are important. They should be bigger. That's a whole thing. And these agencies can develop their capacity to integrate the arts into government, to integrate the arts into how we're looking at climate change, how we're looking at transportation and mobility, how we're looking at education. And if we can raise the awareness, right, of what art can do in all of its shapes and forms, then I think we can do better than we're doing right now. There's an extraordinary professor at Stanford, Professor Alex Nemerov. And when I first took the job, he said to me, Deborah, do not make the case for the arts. He said, demonstrate the consequential impact that art has in our lives. And as you see from I carry that with me and credit him everywhere, because it's about the story of impact. It's about telling the story over and over again of what can happen, what Ed experienced at the DeYoung, what can happen in a theater, what can happen in a classroom, what can happen in a medical center, and making that just part, it's in the water. We know it, we live it, it's part of our lives.
Thank you. And I think building on that comment, and I think you provided some of the answer to this, but I wanted to just read another question that's come in. What avenues do you see for increasing political will and or public support for an extended California Creative Corps or WPA or systems level changes like the GBI? I'm not sure what that GBI is.
So I'll take a stab with it
Yeah.
because there's a very trenchant comment in the chat from Tracy Hudak. California is 35th in the nation in per capita states art spending. This is the state, probably with the possible exception of New York, with the largest fraction of its economy in arts-related employment, either in arts industries or occupations. And yet the state is contributing far too little towards this community, which it should be nurturing to a far greater extent. And we know we're entering a time of stringency and state and federal budgets. But this is a time for there to be more bread in the system, because we know that the federal government is completely withdrawing or censoring what's available for our consumption.
Right, and that question actually came from Tracy, so I think that just to follow on about, so therefore focusing on what should everyone do? What's the call to action to what can we do to increase the political will and public support for the changes that you've both been saying that we need? But yeah, Deborah, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, that moment when we were in the middle of COVID and, the concepts for the Creative Corps were not original, to me by far. There are plenty of people and some very important people, including folks like Danielle Brazil and Julie Baker, Californians for the Arts, and others who were really thinking about what is the WPA or CETA program in this moment. But the key was, one, it was a big Zoom call. I was the only arts person and one of the very few nonprofit people that was part of this 100+ person task force. I saw this moment of real concern for the state, and I went off mute. Right? So number one is go off mute, whatever that means for you. And the second was I had the story, thanks to Dr. Jill Sankey and the University of Florida Center for Arts and Medicine. I had the story. It wasn't just the data, it was the story. And, I think we just have to continue to tell the story. And, what in that particular instance, it was about being of service. It was knowing that the arts had something to offer in the moment and making it really clear what that offer is and how it could manifest. That resulted in $60 million for the California Creative Corps. And again, I can't take all the credit. I was just in a position to go off mute. And I had great stories that other people had researched deeply. So
Yeah, thank you so much. That's an inspiring story and a reminder of how important it is to get that voice heard and to be sitting at tables where people can speak up in those ways and to collect the stories as you mentioned. So I think we're ready to wrap this session up, and I'll turn it over to Michelle in a moment. But I wanted to thank both of you for a really fascinating and informative conversation, and thank you so much for the important work you're doing to advance the arts. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Michelle.